Hi, my name is Thais Gibson, and I am the creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video. And in this video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the dismissive avoidant attachment style is really all about from an integrated attachment theory perspective. So, integrated attachment theory is a body of work that I have created, written, trademarked over the past 10 years. And it really takes like our traditional attachment styles and overlaps them with core wounds, different needs of each attachment style, different emotional patterns, different forms of which they communicate, as well as different relationships to their boundaries and expectations. So I'm going to take you through a bit of a deep dive here into understanding the dismissive avoidant across all of those key forms so that you can really see what's going on. So our dismissive avoidants are the most avoidant on the attachment style continuum, and you'll essentially see that dismissive avoidance, although fearful avoidance can be more intensely disconnected and can really deactivate more intensely, dismissive avoidants tend to be more pervasively deactivated and just sit in their deactivation more often and more easily. Now, they're often very logical, rational thinkers in their adult life. They can be distant, sometimes aloof, sometimes blunt, often grounded, practical, a bit slow to warm up, and they are very guarded and quite slow moving when it comes to relationships, and often very much disconnected from their emotions and used to repressing them. Now, dismissive avoidant attachment style essentially comes about because a dismissive avoidant in their childhood feels very neglected emotionally. Now, we can have overt neglect or covert neglect. Overt neglect will be things like, clear neglect, severe neglect in the home as a whole. But covert neglect is usually most related to emotion. So a lot of dismissive avoidance will be like, oh, I had an idyllic childhood, like everything was great. But then if you look more closely, sort of under a microscope, it's like, yeah, but your emotions were shamed. Nobody ever talked about emotions. There was no healthy modeling for expressing emotions, for working through conflict, things like this. And it actually leaves the dismissive avoidant to feel like this aspect of themselves, the emotional self, is going to be abandoned, is only worthy of neglect. And it's weak and shameful to feel emotions and to tune into that part of oneself. And so this entire aspect of their personality sort of gets repressed and disconnected from the whole. And this shows up and dramatically affects relationships in this person's adult life. Now, some of the core wounds, and think about it this way, like the dismissive avoidant essentially just gets a really strong lack of emotional modeling in childhood. So it feels really scary to go there, to feel their emotions, to try to connect emotionally. And obviously that really has an impact on how we connect in our romantic relationships, because emotions are a big pillar of that, right? We've got like emotional connection, physical connection, sexual connection, intellectual connection. And if that huge pillar is missing, it has massive consequences to relationships. So the major core wounds for dismissive avoidance are I am defective, which is really like something's wrong with me. And that actually comes from being neglected emotionally in childhood, when we have this like really important element of the self that needs attention and connection. And if it's just consistently met with neglect, a childhood mind can't understand. It takes everything personally still, right? We don't have emotional awareness beyond it, that little child's mind can't go, oh, my caregivers are emotionally unavailable. So instead it goes, well, there must be something wrong with me that my needs are not getting met. And then the DA creates this adaptive strategy to just reject their own emotional needs and emotional connection to others to a certain degree. And that seems to provide a good bit of relief. And so it can be something that helps them or serves them as a child, but does not necessarily help long term. There can be big downsides to this, and this is where we need to do the reconditioning work. But defective is a huge core wound. I am unsafe, because when we don't have really important needs met as a child, and when we don't have proper attunement, it often dysregulates the nervous system, and it can leave dismissive avoidance in kind of almost a chronic state of like low level fear and anxiety. So they often feel unsafe. This is why you may see DAs kind of like hoard their resources, be more self-oriented and self-focused, because they're kind of trying to survive according to their nervous system function and the way their sort of subconscious mind perceives things. Dismissive avoidants also have this belief that I will be trapped. I will be weak if I communicate my emotions or open up and I'm vulnerable. I will be trapped if I have to commit to opening myself up to somebody else, right? You can see how these core wounds get projected onto relationships in their adult life. A fear of being helpless, sometimes that more looks like a dismissive avoidant believing they're helpless to change, or incapable of doing relationships in a normal way. Things like this. There are a lot of these like stories that they have about themselves, and also that they will be powerless if they are vulnerable to somebody else, and weak, right? Can be a really big fear. So these tend to be the big core wounds of dismissive avoidant attachment styles in general. Some of the emotional patterns you'll see the most with DAs are feelings of shame, low-level anxiety. A lot of strong emotions don't necessarily make it to the conscious mind surface because they get really deeply repressed into the sub and unconscious mind. But you will see that what could be really strong fear sort of surfaces as irritation, frustration, irritability, impatience. Like these will all be big emotional patterns you'll see. And DAs often feel also drained, overwhelmed, sometimes annoyed. And I know the partners of DAs can feel often like that they take that personally, like, why are you acting like I'm annoying? But that really can have a lot to do with dismissive avoidance having their own feelings of being unsafe, and then trying to kind of focus on like regulating themselves. And then when they get some kind of external input, it can feel like they're even more dysregulated and they can't just get into like a nice rhythm. And so sometimes that frustration or irritation or annoyance will sort of project itself out onto things or situations or people around them. Some of the big needs of the dismissive avoidant attachment style include things like autonomy, independence, their need for freedom to be understood and respected. Remember, they have a subconscious comfort zone around this. So when they were children, having these needs gave them relief. And building this relationship to themselves gave them relief because they weren't getting a lot of major needs met by their caregivers. So the mind has actually associated these things as feeling relieving, as feeling like they're full of like pleasure and avoidance of pain. And then when those things feel infringed upon, it feels like, hey, my coping mechanisms are being taken away. And this is why you'll see a DA really push back if they feel like their needs are being infringed upon. They also need in relationships appreciation and acknowledgement, not in this like overly validating way and not all the time, but around little things. Because I think sometimes one thing that gets lost in the mix for DAs is when they are committed and in relationships, they often, if their whole personality and survival strategy was built around being independent and not being vulnerable, when they start trying to open up and be vulnerable, it's different than somebody who learned that vulnerability was good or was safe. It's very scary. It's kind of excruciating. And so little things like just noticing the effort or the work a DA is putting in often goes a really long way. It doesn't mean if you're somebody who's struggling with a DA, don't have boundaries or don't communicate your needs or stay in a relationship if it's not working for you and the person's not trying, but it does mean to also see how hard it can be for the dismissive avoidant and to be willing to acknowledge and appreciate that. DAs also really value in relationships having understanding, acceptance, and support, as well as harmony and peace. They really don't like conflict and they need time to decompress. Now, part of why they don't like conflict is because their nervous system's already a little dysregulated. But another bigger part is that they also don't believe that conflict is resolvable. They have a sense of learned helplessness around the ability to resolve conflict. So it feels like, ouch, it just hurts and then nothing good comes from it. But that's a representation of the lack of modeling they had for healthy resolution, not a representation of our ability as human beings to actually resolve conflict when we have the right tools. And dismissive avoidants also really value certainty, stability, safety, and comfort in their relationships as a whole. These tend to be really big needs. DAs tend to, when it comes to the relationship to boundaries, set more extreme boundaries than other attachment styles. And what you'll see as well is sometimes those extreme boundaries actually represent all of the lack of small boundaries a DA is setting. So sometimes DAs will say, like, I'm not going to hang out with you this weekend. I'm canceling the plans, rather than just being able to set the small boundaries. Like, hey, I'm feeling tired. I'm going to come over, but I might not talk much. Can we just watch a movie? I just want to kind of tune out, but let's still keep our plans. So they sometimes don't know how to communicate about all those small boundaries and needs. So they set these sort of big boundaries instead as a strategy, because they just don't, again, it's like an unknown for them that they can communicate about those small things and it be well received. By the way, too, as I'm going through all these different things, I have a whole training program all about integrated attachment theory and how to recondition and heal each of these major components. And along with that, teach other people to do so, and open a practice, start a practice as a counselor, a therapist, if you have prior training, or as a coach, if you're starting just from scratch. And I do a whole like 4-hour business session just about like how to start and build a business, along with all of this integrated attachment theory training. And you are welcome to check it out, to join me. We start our next cohort in October. It's live. So we'd love to see you there. And if you're a DA and you just want to learn and heal more, I have an entire course just all about reprogramming these major components of dismissive avoidant attachment style. And also it's October 2022 that it starts, October 5th, 2022. I realize that this video will probably be here for a long time and you may see this years later. So anyways, so the relationship DAs have to their boundaries are like, they're not necessarily adept at setting many small boundaries. So they communicate really strongly and assertively sometimes with these big boundaries, and sometimes won't communicate at all through words, but instead communicate through actions because they feel less equipped to properly communicate and articulate through words. So sometimes they just sort of push away or ghost or remove themselves from a situation because they think that that is a form of communicating, which it is technically, of course. I mean, most communication is nonverbal, but sometimes they think that that will be well received, and don't realize that it's not being well received, don't realize that that's unclear to somebody on the receiving end of that, because DAs tend to really pick up well on the language of actions, whereas you'll see other attachment styles tend to pick up much more effectively on the language of words, and it can create these sort of challenges in relationships accordingly. Some bigger expectations dismissive avoidants have that are worth or sort of learning about and working through and kind of reframing in a healthier, more sort of fair and balanced way, are that my partner should always be understanding when I need space. Conflict should never be occurring in relationships, or should just not really be occurring much at all. And sometimes consciously a DA knows better, but subconsciously, like, this will be this expectation, and they'll feel frustrated when that expectation is violated. Another huge expectation is being with a partner shouldn't mean making compromises. We shouldn't have to change who we are, is often how a DA will communicate about this, but that's not true either, right? I mean, we do have to make compromises, not sacrifices, right? Sacrifices is like, I don't take myself into consideration at all. I just do as I'm told. Compromises, like, I consider what my needs are and consider yours. And we try to find some kind of midway point creatively as best we can. Another big thing is, my partner shouldn't shouldn't need to be soothed by me or emotionally rely on me. In excess, that can be true because healthy interdependence requires that person to emotionally regulate themselves, but also to co-regulate. Whereas Ds kind of believe in like counterdependence, like no one should regulate each other. And there's really a midway point there that's important. And this belief that my partner should be the perfect match, which is sometimes a subconscious strategy to avoid conflict. So these can be some big things. And then common behavioral coping mechanisms are that DAs may withdraw to decompress. It's a huge one. They may stonewall, ignore, or dismiss when they feel frustrated or upset or anxious or just dysregulated themselves. They may try to numb through substances, alcohol, gaming, social media, whatever form that might take. And they have a lot of avoidance-based strategies. I mean, we've got dismissing and avoidance as big coping mechanisms, and you hear that just in the attachment style name, and excess of other creature comforts. And generally, when communicating, dismissive avoidants tend to communicate quite indirectly. Sometimes because I think they don't really know exactly what it is that they want or need or how to articulate that. So again, they try to communicate more through actions than through words, which is sometimes not received well by their attachment styles. And they may communicate a little bit in small spurts and then kind of go into dismissing, stonewalling, or withdrawing when they feel like they are not being heard or understood. And sometimes they don't realize that it's actually their communication that needs support, and needs to be refined rather than the other person being in the wrong for not understanding them. And it's a really powerful place to take accountability as a dismissive avoidant and work on communication, because it will go a very long way in a dismissive avoidance life, whether it's work, romantic relationships, friendships, family relationships, all of those things will be empowered by learning healthy communication tools. So this is really a deep dive into who the DA actually is from an integrated attachment theory perspective. And again, I do a whole bunch of training on this. lots of healing courses that are all about reconditioning these major subsets of the DA. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you in the next video.